Let's start. Number 1. A glass of red wine a day keeps the cardiologist away. Your aunt repeats it at every family gathering while refilling her glass. Doctors used to nod along. An entire generation absorbed the idea that wine was essentially a liquid health supplement with a cork, that the Mediterranean lifestyle came in a bottle, and that choosing red over nothing was practically a medical decision. The science has since dismantled this so completely and so publicly that the researchers involved spent years trying to walk it back. The original studies showing that moderate wine drinkers had better heart outcomes than non-drinkers never accounted for what epidemiologists call the sick quitter effect. People who had already stopped drinking due to serious illness were lumped into the non-drinker category, which made moderate drinkers look comparatively healthier by default. You were comparing relatively healthy social drinkers against a pool that included people who quit because their body forced them to. The baseline was broken before the study even started. Then there is resveratrol, the compound in red wine that became the poster child for cardiovascular protection. It exists in red wine in quantities so negligible that to reach the doses used in the lab studies that showed positive results in mice, you would need to consume approximately 1,000 glasses per day. That is not a rounding error. That is the entire argument collapsing under basic arithmetic. A 2018 Lancet meta-analysis examined data from 195 countries and 28 million people and concluded that the safest level of alcohol consumption is 0. Not 1 drink, not half a drink. 0. The famous French paradox, the idea that French people eat rich food but have low heart disease rates, was partially funded by the wine industry and failed to account for confounding variables, including diet, lifestyle, and the fact that heart disease deaths were being underreported in French medical records at the time. Alcohol does raise levels of HDL cholesterol, the so-called good kind, and that mechanism was used to construct the heart health argument. Here's the problem with that reasoning. 20 minutes of moderate exercise raises HDL cholesterol by a comparable margin without the liver damage, the cancer risk, or the dependency potential bundled in alongside it. The World Health Organization made it official in 2023, stating explicitly that no safe amount of alcohol exists that does not affect health. The industry spent decades funding research institutions to keep the moderate drinking narrative alive, running the same play the tobacco companies ran for 50 years. Saying wine is good for your heart because it contains resveratrol is like saying a fast food burger is a health food because the bun technically contains wheat. The kernel of truth is real. Everything wrapped around it is a marketing campaign. Number 2, every college student knows the protocol. Beer before liquor, never been sicker. Liquor before beer, you're in the clear. It gets passed down at parties with the solemn confidence of received wisdom, spoken by people who are already visibly struggling to stand in a straight line. It has a rhyme scheme, which apparently functions as a substitute for evidence in a significant portion of the population. The rhyme is catchy. It is also pharmacologically meaningless. Your bloodstream does not organize incoming ethanol by the container it arrived in. Once alcohol is absorbed through the stomach lining and small intestine and enters the bloodstream, it is the same molecule regardless of whether it came from a domestic lager or an aged single malt. The sequence is not a variable your liver is tracking. A controlled study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2019 tested this directly. 90 participants were divided into groups that drank beer, then wine, then beer, or only one type throughout the evening. Hangover severity was measured the following morning using validated assessment scales. The conclusion was unambiguous. Order made no statistically significant difference to how anyone felt the next day. The actual predictors of hangover severity are total volume of ethanol consumed, speed of consumption, body weight, hydration level, food intake beforehand, sleep quality, and individual genetic differences in alcohol metabolism. Sequence does not appear on that list. The myth likely persists because of a real behavioral pattern it accidentally describes. People who switch from beer to spirits at a party are usually signaling social escalation. The evening is ramping up, shots are being ordered. The pivot from slow drinks to fast ones correlates with dramatically increased total consumption, and increased total consumption produces worse mornings. People correctly identify that those nights ended badly and then incorrectly attribute the cause to the sequence rather than the volume. Carbonation in beer does accelerate absorption slightly by increasing stomach pressure and widening the pyloric valve, which speeds transit into the small intestine, where most absorption happens. But this applies to any carbonated drink consumed at any point in an evening, not specifically to beer consumed before spirits, and it does not make the next morning worse in any way that the sequence could have prevented. The belief that you can engineer a safe evening by picking the right order is the kind of thinking that sounds like responsible planning, while actively distracting you from the only number that actually matters. Blaming the order of your drinks for your hangover is like blaming the order you put your shoes on for how badly your feet hurt after running a marathon. You ran a marathon. That is the problem. Number 3, don't drink too much or you'll kill brain cells. Parents deliver this line with absolute certainty. Teachers include it in health presentations. It conjures a vivid image of neurons dropping dead with every sip like a slow biological countdown. Your intelligence quietly evaporating while you're trying to have a good time. The warning feels grounded in biology. It is also wrong about the mechanism, which is a strange situation because alcohol does cause genuine and serious neurological damage. It just does it in ways that are considerably more complicated and frankly, more disturbing than simply erasing cells. Neurons do not regenerate easily in most brain regions, which is why the killing them story felt logical. However, direct neuron death from ethanol requires extreme, prolonged poisoning at blood alcohol concentrations, far beyond anything that occurs in social or even heavy recreational drinking. What alcohol actually damages at ordinary levels of heavy use is the dendrites, the branching connective extensions on neurons that allow cells to communicate with each other. Heavy drinking causes dendritic pruning, degrading the brain's communication network without necessarily destroying the underlying cell bodies. The cells are still there. They just cannot talk to each other properly anymore. Alcohol also suppresses neurogenesis, the production of new neurons, primarily in the hippocampus, which governs memory consolidation and spatial navigation. This is why chronic heavy drinkers experience progressive memory problems. They are not losing existing neurons at scale. They are failing to produce new ones, and the region most responsible for forming new memories is where that production failure hits hardest. Then there is Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, a severe neurological disorder associated with chronic alcoholism that causes catastrophic memory impairment and confabulation, a condition where the brain unconsciously invents memories to fill in gaps it cannot access. The cause is not ethanol directly. It is thiamine deficiency, vitamin B1, because heavy drinkers tend to eat poorly and alcohol impairs thiamine absorption. Brain imaging studies on long-term heavy drinkers consistently show reduced white matter density and shrinkage of the prefrontal cortex, the region governing impulse control, judgment, and decision-making. The architectural cruelty here is worth sitting with. The part of your brain responsible for recognizing that a decision is a bad one is the part that chronic drinking degrades first. There is legitimate good news buried in here. Research shows that significant structural brain recovery occurs in former heavy drinkers after sustained sobriety, suggesting much of the damage is functional and connective rather than permanent. Alcohol doesn't shoot your neurons. It cuts the wires between them, fires the maintenance crew, and locks the repair depot. The building is still standing. It just doesn't work right anymore. Number 4, hit the sauna, go for a run, sweat it out. The logic sounds intuitive in the way that a lot of wrong things do. Your body expels things through sweat. Alcohol is something you want expelled from your body. Sweat, therefore, equals sobriety. This chain of reasoning has delivered a meaningful number of still intoxicated people directly into steam rooms, which is a specific category of very bad idea that emergency physicians are familiar with. Sweating does not meaningfully accelerate alcohol elimination. The liver processes approximately 90 to 95% of all consumed ethanol. Sweat, breath, and urine account for the remaining 5 to 10% combined, split between all three. You cannot sweat your way to a lower blood alcohol concentration. You can only wait for your liver to do its job at the speed it was designed to run. The liver metabolizes ethanol at a fixed rate of roughly 1 standard drink per hour, regulated by the enzyme alcohol dehydrogenase. This rate does not increase with physical exertion, elevated heart rate, or profuse sweating. It is a biochemical ceiling, not an adjustable setting. Exercise does slightly increase the rate at which alcohol is exhaled through the lungs due to elevated respiration, but the effect is so small it is clinically irrelevant for any practical purpose. Using a sauna while intoxicated is not just ineffective, it is genuinely dangerous. Alcohol causes vasodilation, the expansion of blood vessels near the skin surface, which drops blood pressure. Extreme heat causes the same response. The combined effect is a sharp increase in the risk of hypotension, dizziness, fainting, and cardiac stress in a room where the floor is slippery and nobody is checking on you. Sweating while intoxicated also accelerates dehydration, and since both alcohol and physical fluid loss deplete electrolytes simultaneously, the person who sweated it out in the sauna typically wakes up in considerably worse shape than the one who sat quietly on the couch drinking water. People feel more alert after a hard workout or a cold sweat, and this subjective sensation creates the impression of increased sobriety. Being mentally stimulated is not the same as having a lower blood alcohol content. You can feel sharp, feel awake, feel ready, and still be legally intoxicated. That combination tends to produce very confident, very impaired decisions. A 2010 study tracking blood alcohol concentration in participants who exercised versus rested after drinking found no statistically significant difference in the rate of decline between the groups. Trying to sweat out alcohol is like trying to drain a bathtub faster by splashing the water around. The drain runs at one speed. All you're doing is making a mess and wearing yourself out. Number 5, someone's had too much. Someone hands them a coffee. The room approves. It is administered with the quiet authority of a folk remedy that has never actually been questioned, as if caffeine is a chemical antidote that neutralizes ethanol on contact, as if the right bean at the right moment constitutes a medical intervention. Coffee does not lower blood alcohol concentration. It does not speed up ethanol metabolism. It does not reverse intoxication by any measurable mechanism. What it produces is an alert, wakeful, intoxicated person, which is, from a public safety standpoint, an arguable upgrade to a dangerous situation. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors in the brain, which reduces the perception of fatigue and suppresses the sedation signal. Alcohol works by depressing the central nervous system. When you combine them, caffeine partially masks the sedative effects of alcohol without touching the underlying impairment in coordination, reaction time, or judgment. A landmark 2006 study published in Behavioral Neuroscience tested this directly using animal models assessing inhibitory control and navigation performance. The caffeine and alcohol group felt alert and behaved as though they were functional. They performed just as poorly as the alcohol-only group on every task requiring actual coordination and decision-making. The alertness was real. The sobriety was not. This distinction has real-world consequences that go well beyond embarrassment. Research consistently shows that people who consume caffeinated alcoholic beverages underestimate their level of intoxication more severely than those who drink alcohol alone and are statistically more likely to attempt to drive afterward. The United States Food and Drug Administration banned pre-mixed caffeinated alcoholic beverages in 2010 explicitly on the basis of evidence linking them to elevated rates of alcohol-related incidents and hospitalizations. That was a regulatory body formally acknowledging that the combination of alcohol and caffeine was producing worse public safety outcomes than alcohol alone. Caffeine also acts as a mild diuretic, contributing to fluid loss at a moment when the body is already dehydrated from ethanol metabolism. The post-night coffee ritual that feels like recovery may actually be extending the dehydration that makes the next morning unpleasant. Blood alcohol content follows the liver's fixed metabolic schedule, regardless of what you drink alongside it. A person at 0.10 BAC who consumes an espresso is a person at 0.10 BAC who feels briefly more awake. Coffee after a big night doesn't sober you up. It gives the impaired person behind the wheel a faster heartbeat and the genuine belief that they're fine. It isn't an antidote. It's a confidence injection for a bad decision. Number 6, stick to vodka, clear liquor, clean morning. Whiskey and dark rum are the dangerous ones, the ones that wreck you, the ones experienced drinkers warn you about. The color coding of spirits as a hangover risk indicator is so embedded in drinking culture that it shapes what people order, how much they feel they can safely consume, and what they blame when the morning goes badly. The rule sounds clean. The biochemistry behind it is considerably more complicated than the shorthand suggests. Dark liquor does produce worse hangovers than clear liquor at equivalent doses of ethanol. That part is true. But the mechanism most people cite for this is vague, and the actual biochemical reason reveals that the gap between dark and clear is real but conditional, and the popular version of the rule generates its own set of dangerous misunderstandings. The relevant compounds are congeners, byproducts of fermentation and barrel aging that include methanol, acetone, acetaldehyde, tannins, and various fusel alcohols. Dark spirits like bourbon, aged whiskey, and dark rum contain significantly higher concentrations of congeners than vodka or gin. A 2010 study published in Alcoholism, Clinical and Experimental Research gave participants equivalent doses of bourbon or vodka and measured hangover severity the following morning. Bourbon produced measurably worse hangovers. Here's the part that matters most. The bourbon group did not report feeling more impaired during the drinking session. Congeners worsen how you feel the next day without changing how drunk you get while it's happening. You don't get an early warning. Methanol, present in higher concentrations in dark spirits, is metabolized by the body into formaldehyde and formic acid, both of which contribute directly to the headache, nausea, and sensitivity associated with severe hangovers. This is the actual driver, not some general quality of darkness or heaviness. Vodka is lower in congeners, but is not hangover-proof at any volume. Sufficient ethanol from any source produces dehydration, disrupted sleep, and acetaldehyde toxicity, which are the primary universal drivers of how bad a morning gets. The myth overgeneralizes into clear equals safe, which leads people to consume more vodka under the false assumption that they have chosen the responsible option and then arrive at the same wrecked morning anyway. Additionally, cheap versions of any spirit contain higher congener levels than premium-aged equivalents. An expensive bourbon may have a cleaner profile than a bottom-shelf vodka, which collapses the dark versus clear framework entirely. Choosing vodka over whiskey to avoid a hangover is like choosing a smaller hammer to hit yourself in the head. It's still a hammer. That was always the problem. Number 7, a drink is a drink. 5% is 5%. 40% is 40%. People treat alcohol by volume as a clean, universal, interchangeable number, as if the percentage on the label is a complete description of what that liquid will do once it enters a human body. Pour the right amount of the right percentage and the math is settled. 2 drinks with identical ABV can produce meaningfully different physiological effects depending on several variables the percentage label does not acknowledge and was never designed to capture. Carbonation significantly accelerates gastric emptying, which is the rate at which stomach contents move into the small intestine where the majority of alcohol absorption occurs. Sparkling wine, champagne, and drinks mixed with carbonated beverages push ethanol into the bloodstream faster than flat drinks of equivalent ABV, a finding replicated in multiple absorption studies. This is why a glass of champagne at a celebration produces a faster, sharper initial effect than the same volume of still wine at the same percentage. The bubbles are not decorative. Temperature affects absorption as well. Warmer drinks are absorbed more quickly than cold ones, which means a warm cocktail carries a faster punch per unit than a chilled equivalent at the same stated ABV. Food in the stomach at the time of drinking alters absorption dramatically. High fat, high protein meals slow gastric emptying significantly and can reduce peak blood alcohol concentration by up to 50% compared to drinking on an empty stomach. Two people consuming identical drinks simultaneously under different eating conditions reach completely different blood alcohol peaks from the same mathematical input. Biological sex introduces further variation. Women typically have lower total body water content, lower levels of gastric alcohol dehydrogenase, the enzyme that begins breaking down ethanol in the stomach before it even reaches the bloodstream, and hormonal fluctuations that affect metabolic rate throughout the month. The result is higher blood alcohol concentration per equivalent dose compared to a man of similar body weight consuming the same amount. Genetic variants in the enzymes responsible for metabolizing ethanol and its primary toxic byproduct, acetaldehyde, create dramatically different physiological responses between individuals at the same blood alcohol level. Some people flush, experience elevated heart rate, and feel significant nausea at doses others process without visible effect. Sugar-rich mixers slow gastric emptying while soda water accelerates it, meaning the same spirit mixed two different ways enters the bloodstream at two different speeds. Trusting ABV to predict how a drink will hit you is like trusting the speed limit sign to tell you how fast traffic is actually moving. The number is real. Everything happening around it makes it almost irrelevant. Number 8, don't mix. Pick one thing and commit to it. Beer and wine and spirits in the same evening is a chemical betrayal, an internal conflict your body cannot manage. And your punishment arrives the next morning with a specificity that feels almost intentional. The don't mix rule sits at the center of amateur drinking strategy globally. It is delivered with the authority of someone who has learned from experience, which is exactly how it has survived without a shred of supporting biochemistry for as long as it has. Mixing different types of alcohol does not cause hangovers. Ethanol causes hangovers. The source container is not a variable your liver is tracking. Once ethanol is in the bloodstream, the enzymatic machinery processing it, specifically alcohol dehydrogenase and aldehyde dehydrogenase, does not operate differently based on which fermented liquid the molecule originated in. There is no biochemical conflict between ethanol molecules from different sources. They are the same molecule. The same 2019 study from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that addressed the beer before liquor myth also evaluated hangover outcomes across participants who mixed drink types versus those who stayed with one. With total ethanol controlled, no significant difference in hangover severity was observed between the groups. The behavioral truth embedded in the myth is real, which is why the myth has staying power. People who mix drinks during an evening typically drink more. Moving from wine at dinner to cocktails to shots at the end of a night represents a pattern of social escalation that correlates with higher total consumption. The mixing is a behavioral marker for a longer, more indulgent session. It is not the cause of the outcome, it is a symptom of the underlying cause, which is the total volume of ethanol consumed across the evening. Theoretical arguments have been made about congener interactions between spirits, but no peer-reviewed study has demonstrated that mixing high congener drinks produces worse outcomes than consuming equivalent congener levels in a single spirit consumed exclusively. The mixing myth provides drinkers with a false sense of strategic control. If I just stay on one thing, I'll be fine. The actual variable being ignored while this mental accounting happens is total volume, which continues accumulating regardless of how loyally you stuck to one category. People wake up from bad nights and correctly identify that they mixed drinks, then incorrectly conclude the mixing was the cause rather than the quantity. Blaming your hangover on mixing drinks is like blaming a car crash on the fact that you were listening to two different radio stations. The genres didn't cause the accident, the speed did. Number 9, someone's had too much. Someone points them toward the shower and turns the handle to cold. The room treats this as legitimate crisis management. Thermal shock, they figure, jolts the system back into functionality. The person goes in impaired and comes out competent. It gets administered with the confidence of a procedure that has been tested, which it has been, and the results are consistently the opposite of what everyone in that room believes. A cold shower does not lower blood alcohol concentration. It does not accelerate the liver's processing of ethanol. It does not reverse impairment in coordination, judgment, or reaction time by any measurable physiological mechanism. What it does is trigger a brief involuntary stress response involving a surge of adrenaline and noradrenaline, elevated heart rate, elevated blood pressure, and a sharp increase in sensory alertness. This response is what people interpret as sobering up. It is adrenaline. Those neurochemicals metabolize within minutes. Once the cold stress subsides, the person is back to the same blood alcohol concentration they had before stepping under the water, except now they are also cold, wet, and slightly disoriented because their cardiovascular system just absorbed an unnecessary shock while suppressed by a central nervous system depressant. The combination is not neutral. Alcohol causes vasodilation, expanding blood vessels near the skin surface. Cold water causes rapid vasoconstriction. This sharp physiological reversal places stress on the cardiovascular system, and in scenarios involving extreme cold exposure, it has been associated with cardiac events in susceptible individuals. Emergency medicine professionals have specifically discouraged cold water immersion as a sobering technique because it reliably produces a false sense of sobriety that leads impaired people to make driving decisions they would not have made if they had simply sat down and waited. Blood alcohol concentration declines according to the liver's fixed metabolic rate. No external temperature change, no cardiovascular stimulation, and no subjective sensation of alertness alters that rate in any clinically meaningful way. A person at 0.12 blood alcohol content who takes a cold shower is a person at 0.12 blood alcohol content who feels briefly sharper. Cold exposure does cause shivering, which marginally elevates overall metabolic rate, but alcohol metabolism specifically is not enhanced by general metabolic elevation to any degree that matters. Time and hydration are the only reliable tools available. The cold shower gives the impaired person a 4-minute commercial break and then returns them to their regularly scheduled intoxication. The alcohol was waiting. It is still there. Number 10, everything in moderation. 1 drink a day is fine, maybe even beneficial. The moderate drinking is safe position is not merely a cultural belief. It has been embedded in official public health guidelines, repeated by physicians in clinical settings, and absorbed by hundreds of millions of people as comfortable, scientifically sanctioned permission to continue their existing habits without guilt. The scientific consensus has undergone a fundamental shift, and the direction of that shift is not subtle. Alcohol is classified as a Group 1 carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the highest possible classification, placing it in the same category as tobacco. It is causally linked to cancers of the mouth, throat, esophagus, liver, colon, and breast. The breast cancer risk is particularly important in this context because research has identified no lower threshold below which the risk disappears. It increases with even light, consistent drinking. The World Health Organization released a formal statement in 2023 stating explicitly that no safe amount of alcohol consumption exists that does not affect health. This was not a fringe position. This was the WHO breaking publicly from decades of hedged messaging about moderation. The earlier observational data that suggested moderate drinkers had better health outcomes than abstainers suffered from multiple confounding problems. The sick quitter effect inflated the abstainer risk category with people who had already stopped drinking due to illness. Healthy user bias meant moderate drinkers tended to have higher incomes and better overall access to health care. Reverse causation meant that the health advantages associated with moderate drinking may have preceded the drinking rather than resulted from it. The 2018 Lancet analysis of data from 195 countries found that while moderate drinking appeared to offer a slight reduction in ischemic heart disease risk, this modest benefit was entirely offset by increased cancer risk and other alcohol-attributable outcomes at even 1 drink per day. At the biochemical level, alcohol disrupts DNA repair mechanisms, generates reactive oxygen species that damage cellular DNA, and metabolizes into acetaldehyde, a compound that binds directly to DNA and proteins and causes mutagenic damage. These mechanisms are not restricted to heavy use, they operate at low doses. National guidelines are being revised downward globally. Canada's 2023 updated guidance reduced its previous low-risk threshold from 15 drinks per week to 2, with an explicit acknowledgement that any alcohol carries some risk. Australia's 2020 guidelines set a low-risk threshold of no more than 10 standard drinks per week. The gap between what the public believes and what current research concludes may be the largest single discrepancy in modern nutritional science. Decades of industry-funded messaging dressed up as public health guidance built a comfort blanket. The science has been pulling threads out of it for 10 years. Make whatever choices you want, just make them with accurate information. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.